Hi folks, welcome back again to IT-140. In this video we are going to discuss 2D lists. In the previous video we talked about lists. Lists are a data structure. That just means they are a structure that contains data. It's a way of holding items for use throughout your program. Now a 2D list is basically just a list of lists. So the items that are inside your list are themselves lists. So let's take a quick look here. I'm going to copy some code. It's easier than making you guys sit through me typing. So if you look right here, we have a variable called cast, and we have a list. You can see up here is the opening, and down here are the closing square brackets, so that indicates it's a list. And then everything inside that list is itself another list. So here we have a list: Graham, King Arthur and deceased, Michael, Sir Galahad the Pure and alive, and so forth and so on. So if you haven't figured it out yet, that's the cast from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Warned you there would be some Monty Python references throughout this course because it's Python. That's where the Python name came from, was from Monty Python. So here we go. So anyway, if you want to, if you look at this for a moment, you can sort of see an inherent structure inside this 2D list. Each list inside the main list, each of the sublists, sort of represents what you might call a record, right? So we have the record of Graham, the role he played in the movie, and he is deceased. Sadly, we lost him several years ago. Yeah, so each one of those acts sort of as a record that you can deal with individually. If you look at it a slightly different way, they also sort of resemble a spreadsheet, like you might see in Excel, where each of the sublists represents a row, and then each item inside that sublist represents a column. And that's often a really great way to think about 2D lists. So let's kind of pick that apart a little bit and see what we can do with that. Again, I'm going to copy a little bit of code here just to make things easier for us. But let's walk through it. So we have the first four, so we're going to loop through this list of lists, and we're going to do something with it, right? So the first for loop is for row inside cast. Actually, let's do this real fast. Now, if we run this, what we will see is we have each of our lists being printed out one line at a time, right? So that's something that we should probably expect to see, right? That we are looping over this main list, right? And we're grabbing each item inside that list, just like we did in the list video, and now we're printing it out, and so the items are themselves these other lists. Pretty straightforward. I think that makes sense. Then if you want to, let's get this old code back and walk through this. So we still have the for row and cast, right? So we are going to print out what this row contains. Then under that, we're going to make another for loop, a nested for loop. So we're going to say for column inside row. Because remember, when we get to this point right here, row contains one of the items in that list. So what we have here is we have the ability to loop over the items inside row and print those out individually. So we're going to print off each of the individual entries inside the row. And we also want to do a bit of a break so that everything doesn't sort of run on top of itself. We want to give a little bit of space, and we want to let you know that you are moving on to the next record. So we're going to do that here with this last print statement. Now the thing I want you to notice is that this print statement here is not indented with the other print statement. This print statement here is at the same level as that for statement and that print statement. So what that means is this print statement is only going to run at the end of the row loop. All right, so we are going to run through this row loop, this loop the first time. We're going to grab that first row, we're going to do whatever with it, and then the last thing we're going to do when we have this first item is we're going to print out and tell you we're going to the next record. And then, because that print statement is indented one level of indentation from the outside for loop, when it's all finished, we'll print that out, and then we'll go and grab the next item out of the list and start the whole thing over again. So let's see what that looks like. I'm going to run current, and you can see we get a lot more information here. We get this row contains, and that's what the row contains, and then each entry inside the row gets its own line. Then we tell you we're going to print the next record. We give it a little blank space so that there's some space there, so you don't so your eyes don't cross when you're trying to figure out what's what. And then we go to the next row and we print out what the row contains. So here we're printing it out at the row level, and then here we're printing it out at the individual column levels, or the individual items inside that row, and go on to the next record. This is a really common way of getting inside and working with a two-dimensional list, and this is going to come up during the challenges. There are some very challenging challenges that include 2D lists that where you're going to want to go in and manipulate some data. So one of the things we could do is we're going to say, actually, let's look at a little bit different piece of code for this. Give me just a second. We're going to change this out a little bit. We're going to look at this bit of code. We still have the same cast. We still have the same for row and cast, and then we're going to go for column and row. But here we're doing an if statement inside this second loop. So we're going to look for any column item that says deceased, and if that column, if we find deceased as an item in that column, we're going to remove the entire row, right? Because still, even though we've got this outer loop, we've got this inner loop, we still have access to the entire row anytime we need it, as long as we're inside this outer loop. So if we run this, we're going to pull anyone that's deceased out of the cast, and then we're going to go through and print the whole cast again. So if you see here, now we are clearly missing Graham because he is deceased. So we have pulled him out of the cast list by looking for a particular column inside this whichever row, right? So we're spinning through all the rows looking for a particular column, but let's say we didn't want to remove the entire row. We wanted to change the column. So one thing we could do is, because we have access to the row right now, we could remove the column item, right? So that's going to take it out completely of the list. But then we want to replace it with something, so we're going to append, and we're going to say rest in peace. And if we run that, we should see Graham, rest in peace. Now, one thing to remember, though, is this worked this way because the deceased is the last item in the list. When you append, you always append to the very end of the list. If deceased had been in the middle of the list, this wouldn't have worked out quite as well. Because it would have shifted everything around. It would have, well, let's just look and see. If instead of deceased, we say it's King Arthur, and We're going to just run it as that. See what happens. See, we still have Graham, deceased, and rest in peace. Because what ended up happening is we looked for King Arthur, which is the second item. We pulled it out, no problem, but that shifted everything up. So deceased became moved over one to the left, and then rest in peace got appended to the end. So you have to be very careful. You have to know a little bit about your data and be very careful when you're trying to make changes to it, but it's absolutely possible to make those kinds of changes when you're in the middle of running this. So in any case, that's a quick introduction to two-dimensional lists and some ideas on how best to approach them. I hope this has helped out. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. And look for a forthcoming video on dictionaries. That'll be the last data structure we talk about.